Hello, everyone, and welcome to the new episode of Entrepreneurship Lab. This is your host, Nevena Bajalac, welcoming you once again to the podcast where we help you grow and scale your business. And today we're talking about, let's say, maybe the most important topic, and that's how you need to grow your profit or how can you grow your profit. And especially for those of you who are now in the phases of growing, maybe revenue is coming in and it's increasing, but not your profits. So you're wondering, where is my money going? So today we bring on the show Ben Hansen. He's also known as a profit doctor. And Ben is actually 5 times Inc. 5,000 entrepreneur and founder. He also is an expert in specialize in curing something he calls profititis, and we're going to talk about that today. And he's going to deliver practical advices and solutions for you to increase your profit. So Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to getting a chance to meeting you, and hopefully some of those white sand beaches from Zanzibar are going to rub off on this conversation.
Yes, you're welcome anytime to visit. I'm very excited to talk about this topic because profit is really one of the most important things in business and growing the business. Because if numbers don't lie, yes, and if we think we are growing but our money is going somewhere and we cannot keep any of it, we are maybe not actually growing as good as we think. So tell me a little bit more about the background. How did you become the profit doctor? Where did you start it as entrepreneur? How did your journey begin?
Absolutely. I think some people are just born with an entrepreneurial bone in their body, and I think that was me. I tell a little story sometimes, and let me just digress and share it right here. When I was about 13, one afternoon, I was playing with a friend, and then we called my dad and we said, "Hey, would you take us to the museum?" And he came home and took us to the museum, and we brought this little paper shopping bag with us. And then we navigated down into the basement of the museum. I put this shopping bag on this fellow's desk, and he looked at it and he said, "Is that it?" And I nodded, and he went and he got these huge gloves and this long, like 1 meter long set of tongs. And he took this bag and he put it into this big glass box and he kind of dumped it out. And out came this 4.5 foot coral snake. And a coral snake is one of the most poisonous snakes in North America, actually. And so me and my friend had caught this snake, and we decided we are going to go into the poisonous snake catching business. And ultimately, my mom, who's terrified of snakes, talks me out of it by paying me snake allowance. So if you think about this, she paid me $10 a week to not catch snakes. And so I make a metaphor of this to the importance around profitability because I feel for very, very many businesses, they essentially have all manner of poisonous snakes within their company that are sort of poisoning the profitability of their business. And so, ironically, by releasing the snakes or releasing those things that you're doing that are kind of sucking the profitability out of your business, you can really up level the profitability of your company. And so I think for this conversation, somewhat ironically, what we'll talk about doing to improve profitability is to identify those things to stop doing. And that I think is actually one of the biggest secrets to improving profitability.
Yeah, and a powerful thing. But I want to ask first, is this story real? Like you guys really wanted to catch snakes? Where do you live, by the way?
So I grew up in Gainesville, Florida. I was trying to
Uh-huh.
compress the story there. But in Florida, there are a lot of snakes. There's actually a lot
Okay.
of press these days about how invasive species from other countries and continents have taken up residence within Florida. But back at that time, the coral snake was one of the most poisonous snakes in North America, still is. Turns out not as deadly as some others because it's not so aggressive. But yes, it's a real story. Snake allowance was alive and well for at least a few months until I got sidetracked like any good entrepreneur on another business.
So at this time you realize, okay, I can get some income, yeah, from this. But how old were you? Did you went to college? When did you started your first business? Can you tell us what was your first business and maybe some learning that came out of that time?
Sure. I'm not sure it really counts. We had lawn mowing business, and for our school, I was in charge of our fundraising events. And this was back, the school fundraising event was grade school. So I was maybe 7 or 8 or 9 years old. Um, but ironically, I kind of started with a lot of that entrepreneurial zest. There were also some startup companies where I joined as an early employee. My first actual business was one of those where you leave corporate America, in this case, Microsoft. I was about 40 years old or so, and I had a long history at Microsoft at that time of purchasing contract marketing services. And so then I was like, wow, what a great business. I left Microsoft to sell what I used to buy to the people that I used to work with. And so it was a very niche oriented staffing company or staffing and consulting, where I sold marketing and marketing analytics consulting services. At that time, mostly to Microsoft. This was in the Seattle area, but then also to some other large companies in that area like Nordstrom's and T-Mobile.
Very, very interesting. And maybe we can share with us at that time at Microsoft, did you also manage profits? Did you learn a lot about it at that time, or it came later when you started running your business?
So, in terms of profitability, I guess I would say that that's always been a very strong theme for me because I was always the sort of start with the end in mind person. And for me, the fundamental point of business was to keep profitability rather than specifically just focusing on growth or just focusing on revenue. In fact, to me, that is what I think of as one of the biggest myths of business and entrepreneurship, which is that we need to focus on growth, growth, growth all the time. And so I do think that for smaller businesses or early stage startups, growth and revenue and market acceptance is often the most important thing in the beginning to kind of get over the hump. But, once you've got at least a few $1 million in revenue, then I would say profitability
Yeah.
really rises significantly in significance. Unfortunately, because so much of the business press are just focused on revenue, revenue, revenue. So many times, entrepreneurs and business owners, even after their millions, tens of millions, 50 million, are so laser focused on growth. Oftentimes, they ignore to a large extent or don't give enough attention to profitability.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So tell us, you talk about profititis, right? You call it profititis. What is it and how we can cure it?
Yeah. So my business consultancy name is Profit Doctor. So we have, a lot of themes around kind of the medical theme. And profititis, if you will, is coining the condition where you have a relatively healthy top line or revenue or sales picture, but a weak, sick, or anemic bottom line or profitability. And so what we see very often is that a company, let's say at 1 million in revenue, highly profitable, 2 million, a little bit less profitable in terms of percentage profitability. And as their revenue keeps climbing, often the total dollars of profitability stays somewhat flat or the percentage starts to decline. And we call that profititis, where essentially you're spending more and more as you grow on all flavor of costs and customer acquisition and whatnot. And so your net profitability as a percentage is declining. And sometimes even as a total net dollar figure is declining or flattening.
Yeah, very interesting. And thank you for sharing those numbers with us. And I want to ask you now that we talk about this and talking about the growth, what are some myths about profit, like some things that people believe, but they're not actually true?
hmm Well, I touched on one, which is this myth of growth. And the idea there is so many businesses are focusing like 150% on revenue growth and customer acquisition and very, very little on profitability. Now, it is a trick as you're very small and just starting out in terms of revenue and market acceptance. I sometimes change my tune on this a little bit and say maybe getting a certain level of revenue might in fact be more critical than profitability when you're just starting out. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So one is this idea of growth, and what I try to help most of my clients on, and these are typically 2 million, 5 million, 10 million, 50 million, kind of in that range is sort of the sweetest spot of the companies that we help, how important it is to not spend 150% of your energy on growth and 0% on profitability, but maybe
Yeah.
80% on growth and 20% on profitability, or maybe having a pulse of 3 to 6 months where you clean up your profitability picture and then get back to focusing much more on growth. Sometimes we like those cycles quite a bit with our clients.
Interesting.
Another,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, another big one I would say is the myth of more, 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 more. And this, I think, is what really gets people in trouble, where they're chasing, trying to do so many things, saying yes to more things, and not saying no to enough things. And for example, digital marketing, I think, is a good one. It's easy to feel that I got to be on all these platforms and have to be doing all this and long form content and short form content and start my own podcast and be on podcast. And it's like, well, do you really have enough bandwidth and investment to be able to effectively reach out on all those platforms? Or in fact, might you be better going deeper and bigger on fewer of these various channels? And that's just an example
Yeah.
of maybe more is not always better, and more can really trip you up in terms of profitability. And
Yeah.
we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I think especially with younger, smaller startup companies, I think it becomes very, very critical to often get very narrow on what customer you're serving and what product or service you're offering. Because if you're trying to be all things to all people, it's going to be very, very challenging to be successful as a small business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we know also a lot of examples of some big companies, known companies that had huge revenues and went out of the
Hmm.
business because they were not profitable, actually. So that's absolutely what you're doing and talking about is so crucial. So you said a lot of our listeners are startups, they're growing their business. If they want to
Hmm.
increase profitability, what are some mistakes they should avoid? Let's talk about mistakes maybe first. Or
Right.
worse, you call it also like the killers of the profit, right? So what are
Yes.
those, some
Yes.
of those?
Yeah. Let's just talk a little bit. So, the companies that I typically work with, as I suggested, kind of in that 2 to 50 million in annual revenue rate. And one of the most powerful things that we do for them is to help them within 90 days double their profitability. And the way that we frequently do that is to identify those two or three things where what they're doing is costing them a lot of money. So we actually show them how to do less of those worst things that they're doing. And by cutting those things, what they often do is they free up a lot of cash flow and profitability or money to go right down to the bottom line. In addition, they save a lot of time and they put that time back on their personal calendar and often free up a lot of resources from their staff. And then they free up a lot of time and energy because often it can be very stressful and debilitating and kind of drag you down when you're trying to fix things that are so hopelessly broken that you'd be better off without them. Now, that recipe works incredibly well for companies that have already achieved, several million to, let's say, 50 or 100 million in revenue, and it immediately puts a big boost into their profitability. Now, what I'll tell you is that exact same playbook is incredibly, incredibly powerful and important for those smaller companies trying to get from, let's say, 6 to 7 figures. Now, there's a twist. What it won't do often, if your revenue is, let's just say a few 100,000, what it might not do is put a ton of profitability back into your pocket. But what it will do is it will help you identify which of those things that you're doing have a really high margin and the opportunity to put a lot of profitability into your pocket if you can scale it a little bit more. But maybe the most important thing is when it puts time and energy back in your calendar and kind of in your headspace. Because if you're trying to get from 6 to 7 figures, you're not going to do it by selling to customers that are very marginal in terms of the benefit to the business, or selling products or services that are very marginal in terms of the profitability or margin of those products and services. So I guess what I'm saying is it's the same
Yeah.
playbook. Stop selling to those low performing customer segments and those low performing products and services. But the payback will be a little bit different. When you're more established, it will immediately generate hundreds of thousands of dollars of incremental profitability. However, if you're smaller and don't even have hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue, you're not going to get that kind of immediate profitability payback. But what you're going to get is you're going to get the opportunity to narrow your focus to high performance customers, high performance offerings, put a lot of time and resource back with you and your team so that you can break through and sell more of highly targeted products and services to highly targeted customer segments. And that is going to be your secret sauce to help you break through into 7 figures, for example. Does that
Amazing.
make sense?
Thank you.
Ask me a
Yeah.
question if I missed
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
there
No,
or
no, I
oversimplified.
absolutely no. I think it's
Yeah.
so, so helpful. And I think a lot of startups, like you say, we sometimes are trying to get more and more and more, and then at some point, I know working also in consulting, we realize, hey, I don't want all of this type of clients. So I think what you just
Mhm.
said is also quality over quantity. I'm also for that. Like if you really deliver quality, you
Very
can
much.
increase your prices of your product or services and deliver and have even less clients, but you're getting higher profits for you. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that, Ben.
Yeah.
And if you want,
I've actually got I've got a story I
yeah,
wanted to share with you.
yeah,
I
please.
kind of skipped over a little bit of my earlier entrepreneurial journey with a company called Mactus Group, which I founded in 2007. But it kind of ties these things together. So Mactus Group was a consulting and staffing company. So it was a consulting style offer delivered with a staffing style business model, where typically providing long-term individuals or teams of individuals for 6 months to a year and kind of the full-time effort. So it wasn't sort of fractional people. It tended to be full-time people a year at a time, but a very high-touch focused consulting model. But the thing that I wanted to share is the thing that allowed us to go from 0 to 13 million in revenue in 8 years, or from just me to me and 100 team members in that short period of time, is we were very narrowly focused on the types of customers we worked with and the types of offerings that we provided. And so I was just kind of talking about that on how you could bring a lot of profitability to the bottom line by exiting low performing customers and products and services. And then how, as a small business, I won't say pre-revenue, but 6 figures, not 7 figures, that being very niche focused would allow you to grow rapidly. That was our story. We didn't offer, consulting or staffing to every kind of functional area. We didn't offer, finance and accounting. We didn't offer HR services. It wasn't operations and coding and things like that. It was very narrowly focused on marketing, project and program management, and then marketing analytics. And so
Yeah,
that allowed us to be very focused only, well, I hate to say chase, but pursue, those kinds of it was easier for us to build our book of consultants, if you will, or our roster of consultants, we weren't trying to recruit every functional area, but a very narrow set of functional areas. And then we were only going to pursue customers that needed that kind of service. And then we were only working with a very select set of companies. And by being so niche and narrowly focused, I say it allowed us to recycle our work. And what I mean by that is just as an example, let's say we recruited three candidates for a specific role. You're only going to fill one person, right? What happens to those other two? Well, for us, those other two were a very reusable resource for us because we were going to keep pursuing those exact same kind of additional roles in that same
Yeah.
area. So we got to use the same work several times. So
Mm.
let's say you're a consultant in social media, for example. If you're pursuing all kinds of customers, not all customers are you going to be able to recycle those same learnings. Let's just say social media for a manufacturing company versus a solopreneur versus a retail or a services business. All those lessons or all that preliminary work that you've put in there is not necessarily going to be equally recyclable across all of those. Or your marketing materials or your case studies are not going to go as far when you have to spread it across so many different types of customer or service categories.
Yeah, very interesting. And thank you for sharing. I love the stories because they give us like a real picture of your
Hmm.
learning and what you guys been through. And I always like to ask this question, if you can go back in time and you wish there is one thing that you knew earlier about, growing your business, maybe it's about profit, maybe something else, and
Hmm.
it was maybe a aha moment and you wish other people to know, and because you believe it will help you grow faster, what it would be?
Hmm.
Is there one thing that you think made a big impact when you realize it, that was a aha moment for you to actually really scale from zero to over 100 people and millions of dollars?
Hmm. Hmm. It's a great question, and thanks for asking. It kind of reminds me of part of the story that I missed out on. When we started, we very quickly got to about $4 million and a dozen to 30 employees. And at that time, I decided I was really going to grow the business. And I kind of almost broke my own rule, if you will. And when we went from 4 million to 12 million, roughly our total net profitability on a dollar basis stayed about the same. And while intellectually I knew that I was trying to grow really fast, we grew about 40% a year every year for that period of time. Um, I didn't fully appreciate at that time the costs associated with that rapid growth without improving profitability. If you grow rapidly without improving profitability, another way to look at that is that you're being much less efficient, much less effective. That will likely mean that you're investing in customers, investing in employees, investing in product and service lines that are not very effective or productive. Another way to look at that is that there's a lot more broken stuff in your business. So let's say you're 20% net profitability at 4 million and 7% net profitability at 12 million. Another way to look at that is you've got another $8 million worth of revenue that is producing zero net profitability. And another way to look at that is you've got a lot of broken stuff in your business. And what happened to me is as that broken stuff started accumulating in my business, it really took up a lot of headspace and kind of drained my personal gas tank. And that is the thing that I didn't appreciate. And I think I would have done so much better if on a regular basis I had maybe culled some of those broken things from my business to get back to that high level of profitability. Because when our business was at such high levels of profitability, again, another way to look at that is we were highly efficient and things were working. We were lean and mean and streamlined, and there was a lot of energy associated with that. As compared to when a lot of things are broken or dragging you down or not functioning very well, man, it can really beat you up as an entrepreneur. And
Yeah.
probably the single biggest lesson from that is as an entrepreneur, maintaining and protecting your gas tank or your personal energy may be one of the most important things you can do. You've probably experienced this as an entrepreneur. I guess I'm speaking to the camera now, all you listeners out there. You
Yeah.
know, when you're on top of your game and feeling strong and unstoppable, it's like, man, you can walk through walls. But when you're feeling kind of down and dragged down and beat up, it's, quote, hard to get out of bed. It's hard to get
Yeah.
enthusiastic about what's going on. And like everything is an insurmountable obstacle. And that's just like what's going on between your ears. And I'll just say that's why in our programs and courses here at Profit Doctor, we treat profit psychology and kind of tuning up that gas tank or refilling that gas tank for our entrepreneurs is so important and so critical. Many of our customers come to us because they're losing money or break even or low single digits, and they want our help to double their profitability and get to, double digit profitability. But often one of the big blockers is that profit psychology or the fact that they've kind of been beat up and their gas tank is sort
Mm.
of running on empty.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And a little bit reminded me, when we're expanding, when you talk about expansion and, companies, we take new offices, new
Hmm.
equipment, we are, believing we're growing and we are actually, expanding so much. And it also reminded me a little bit about also employers, when we are employed and we get increase in salary. Well, most people are doing, they're also increasing their lifestyle. So that's why a lot of people are still in debt. A lot of people cannot save and so on because as our revenue or our salary grows, sometimes we increase our expenses as well. And that kind of reminded me when you talked about it, where a lot of people are stuck. So as we have to wrap up, I want to ask you for one last advice and maybe about
Hmm.
if somebody listen and they want to start today, where should they start? Is it
Hmm.
looking at your numbers? Because I also know a lot of startups are not correctly tracking their numbers. They don't know correctly their expenses. They don't know their revenue. Where would you say like people should start today to increase their profitability?
Yeah. Well, this is maybe a two-part answer. For those of your listeners who are already in that kind of seven-figure and up range, so let's say 1 million, 2 million and up, what I would highly recommend you do is look for the leaks in your bucket, so to speak. So if you think of your business or your P&L as a bucket, and then you look for the leaks where profitability and expenses and money is leaking out, those are some of the most direct profit killers. And we even offer a leak detection tool for free on our website. So it's www.profitdoctor.com/leaks, leaks. And Profit Doctor is spelled out the normal way, profit like money, Profit, and then doctor, Doctor. So profitdoctor.com/leaks. What we do is we have a very simple calculator to help you ask yourself some questions on where in your business it's most likely to be leaking profitability, whether it's your team members, your customers, products and services, expenses, etc.
Amazing.
Now,
So
yeah,
yeah, I will let you finish, but we just want to invite everyone, make sure to go to Profit Doctor because Ben has so many resources that can help you. And you should definitely
yeah,
use them. Yeah, he just offered you
yeah,
something so amazing. So yes, Ben, let's
but
uh,
yeah,
let's finish. What was the second
yeah.
part?
And then the second part is for those of your audience members who are a lot maybe younger and newer in their journey, not necessarily your age, but maturation of your business, just trying to get to six figures or from six to seven, for example. I still think that that tool could be very valuable for you, but you might just have to turn it a little bit sideways as you think about it. So maybe it's a little bit less of money leaking out of your bucket, and that by patching it, it could help you double your profitability. Think of it as time or energy leaking out of your bucket. And so, as a solopreneur, for example, there's only X amount of hours in the day, and you have to be applying those hours to where you're getting the greatest return. And so you might think about if you're chasing two different types of customers, one has a very modest return and one has a very high return. By stopping chasing those low end customers, you're going to have a lot more time and energy back on your calendar, if you will, to go get a second high value client. And it's those high value clients that are going to give you the kind of leverage that's going to get you to six figures and seven figures. So I think it's the same tool,
Yeah.
the same advice, which is, as we say, to do less of the worst things or
Mm.
stop doing those things that are not serving you or addition by subtraction. Very, very powerful to get very, very focused and narrow as a solopreneur, pre-revenue, just beginning to get revenue, six figure, trying to get to seven figure, because your set of resources are so much less. And you've got to get time back in your day to focus on the things that have tremendous leverage, not the things that are medium. You got to
Yeah.
focus on high, high, high priority, high payback kind of things, high leverage,
Yeah.
not the medium stuff.
Thank you, Ben, so much for sharing and making this such an insightful episode and giving so many tips to everyone. I really enjoy, and time is flying. Like I could talk forever about this topic.
So much fun. Let me ask you, Nirvana, of the things that I said, maybe what resonated with you from your own professional experience that you think would really land most impactfully or give the most bang for the buck for your audience?
I think definitely it's those leaks because what I see in companies, like you said, they are growing and their revenue is growing, they're acquiring more customers, they have bigger deals. But then when we look into it, like you said, either they are investing so much into acquiring those customers or just expanding new offices things so their expenses are going so much, and then sometimes you say, hey, do we really need this? Because profit is priority. So for me that was the one that I recognize a lot as well, and I'm sure you as well in business. So thank you once again. I want to just invite everyone, go to www.profitdoctor.com, connect with Ben on social media as well, follow them. They have amazing webinars, amazing materials for you. And please give us some likes, hearts, share this episode with at least one more entrepreneur that can benefit from it. And I'm looking forward to see you in the next episode.